this is Trevor Weltman of the Pacific Asia Travel Association and the PATA Crisis Resource Center. I'm very excited to conduct an interview today with Dr. Cyn-Young Park of the Asian Development Bank. Today's focus is on the paper she and her team recently put out, analyzing the impact of COVID-19 on the global and regional economies. Dr. Park, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you here. And just for the benefit of our audience, it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and your areas of focus.
Well, my name is Cyn-Young Park. I'm the Director of Regional Cooperation Integration in ADB's Research Department. My interest has been generally on the dynamics of the regional integration and also how Asia can make a progress in terms of cross-border movement of goods and services, as well as the investment flows, and then how countries can work together to maintain the economic and then financial stability to manage these better sort of a flow of these cross-border movement towards the inclusive and sustainable growth in the region.
Thank you. And knowing that we want to talk about regional harmony today, we're really happy to have you here and to go over this. I know personally when I saw your name as one of the authors on the study, I was really excited to be able to reach back out and to speak to you in a more focused way, knowing that typically our last interactions have happened in a meeting setting. So thank you very much for making the time. Shifting to COVID specifically, the economic projections that are outlined in your most recent paper are quite stark, anywhere from 5.8 to 8.8 trillion US dollars. To you, when you and your team were putting together this study, what is one of the most troubling aspects of your projections in your opinion, and why do you see it that way?
Well, at least for me, what is most important in that projection is the figure of unemployment. In fact, the countries that have experienced quite a significant slowdown in their businesses, partly due to direct impact of COVID, but as the country's efforts to contain the spread of the virus, and then also quite stringent lockdown measures. The business may not be able to recover fully if the this impact and then the COVID situation gets prolonged and have an implication of the increase in the unemployment. When this type of job losses are quite large and significant, and then gets prolonged, people will also lose the the income and then the sources of the more like the training, and then also the sources of their investment in education. There are a lot of challenges in preparing for their future workability as well. So this unemployment figure is actually quite significant, not only just the short-term kind of like income losses, but also losses in investment in our future.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that in mind, knowing that there could be some long-term impacts that are not just financial, but looking at some of the social impacts of this, different economists and different experts right now are saying there's going to be no return to the past normal. We're going to be looking at a new normal. From an economic perspective, what parts of the old economy or the pre-COVID economies do you think will be left behind? They were either exposed to be unstable, or they're not going to factor in as heavily into the post-COVID era.
Countries have already experienced quite a significant the impact on the labor-intensive manufacturing sectors due to the social distancing rules and lockdown measures. This labor-intensive manufacturing will suffer quite significantly in the post-COVID recovery. and traditional services that really also involve a large number of sort of workers in less sort of a sanitary, less protected kind of environment will suffer in the post-COVID world.
With that said, then, what areas of the economy do you think will really benefit or grow as a result of the post-COVID world? What are some of the trends or emerging areas that you think will they were either here with us pre-COVID and this will assist them in growing more, or because of COVID, they are now new and they will grow going forward?
Well, COVID somehow made people actually engage more online activities, and the companies and also the many like other sort of public agencies are now switching to the digital platforms. So technology and digital transformation will really accelerate. This is a bit of an unusual situation. We might have had going with this trend of digitalization a little more gradually, but the COVID provided this opportunity for any sort of the agencies or individuals trying out so many different digital platforms and really making this digital transformation like actually happening, and it's going to accelerate, and then that's going to be a part of our new normal.
Yeah, I think what we've seen too is people who hesitated before to go fully digital, having been forced, are also enjoying it. And certain studies I've seen corroborate that. Great. So critically, the crux of your paper, in my opinion, is highlighting how strong policy intervention now can save billions of dollars down the line, anywhere from 30 to 40%, whether it's the 3-month containment or 6-month containment. So to you, what are some of the most important areas that governments in Asia Pacific should be focusing on right now from a policy standpoint to enable that containment?
The first priority should be on definitely the rapid containment of the pandemic. We actually show as the containment period gets longer, the economic cost will grow even further. So this is not a trade-off situation. Many people do argue like that maybe the lockdown measures too stringent, and then that's delaying the recovery. But what we also see is if the lockdown is not effective, and then it has not really fully flattened the curve, but we start the relaxing the rule, and that's going to actually lead another wave, given that this is a novel virus and then people are not immune to it yet. So it is really important that we continue to make sure that the curve does flatten, and then we will be able to manage the virus and in a way that really is going to be still more sustainable of our economic recovery. But at the same time, what we also see is this impact of COVID is becoming very unequal in the economy, protecting the most vulnerable group with a much better social and then especially the health protection and then programs are going to be very important. And then in the meantime, given that this is going to be a bit of a longer battle to fight, it is important to support the continuity of businesses, especially the SMEs.
Business continuity. Great. Great. So looking then from an individual market to the regional market, and given just how interconnected our regional economy is here in Asia Pacific, recovery is going to necessitate regional cooperation. What are the important aspects of economic policy that should be the easiest to coordinate across borders to assist with this recovery, in your opinion, and why? Where could that regional cooperation begin?
Well, the countries have been already fairly quick in making very swift, stimuli policies. There are many monetary accommodative and then also the fiscal stimulus packages around the region and in the world. So providing these macroeconomic stimuli has been seemingly quite easy, and then was not even without like formal coordination. The countries have done it in a way that is seemingly coordinated. But what I feel is it's going to be quite challenging to steer exit from these stimuli economy to a normal economy. And how do we actually balance the need to provide the stimulus, but at the same time that it doesn't really lead to unsustainable growth in terms of financial excesses, and also the firms that are not solvent remain remain sort of surviving in on the stimulus packages, and then those will be quite challenging to manage going forward. So how do we use these stimulus and how to steer the exit from the stimulus will be quite challenging going forward.
And is that on an individual country level you're seeing this? Or this is something that you think is going to impact the cross-border trade as well?
Well, there's going to be, of course, the cross-border trade as well. What we see is, the world is much more connected than before. So, we are only as strong as our weakest links. If we do not somehow make the level and standard of our weakest link upgraded, and then also much more stable, we will all fall together in terms of the trade, investment, and the businesses. So this is, the kind of like a time that it's really testing the, the need for the cooperation. We need to also steer exit in a cooperative way. Some countries open, some countries don't. But then the countries that are open, if they don't really meet the standard of public sort of health regulations, that can actually spread to the other countries.
Sure.
So.
This is something that's come up in several of our interviews, particular to the travel industry, which is the hotels and the airports who have the financial capacity to invest millions of dollars in not only the development of policies, but investing in technology to meet the standards of those policies. Well, if you're staying in a 4- or 5-star hotel, that's great. But if you want to take your day trip to the local markets or to the river or to the handicraft villages, it's all about that capacity gap, because those other entities may not have the same capability to reach that standard of sanitation or safety or health awareness. So it's all about the weakest link. And this crisis, I think, as you've highlighted, has very much so highlighted the fact that in a public health emergency, we are only as strong as that weakest link. So with that, a question that I've been asking the different people I've been speaking to is, we've all experienced different economic crises. I think as a businessman or woman in the world, we kind of look back on our careers and we see not only our own progression, but how the market at different times determined our progression or our growth as individuals and as professionals. And with that in mind, I'm a big fan of the book Principles by Ray Dalio. And in it, he famously says that every event, while it's happening, it seems very novel and seems very unique. But actually, if we study history, we look back and we can say, okay, well, aspects of it were unique, but it was actually just another one of those. So I wanted to ask, in your opinion, first, what about this crisis, and if you look back on other economic situations we faced, is similar to those? Or what economic crisis in the past do you think we could most draw lessons from that will help us bring about that regional cooperation now?
Many people seem to compare this COVID crisis to the Spanish flu in 1918. It's quite interesting because if you, I don't know if you have actually encountered some of these articles that compare these two crises. Something that struck me is that even during the, this 1918, the Spanish flu, in fact, spread along the lines of the soldiers' movement. So the connectivity seems to be still a very strong kind of feature of this flu, spreading around the world. And it, like at first, kind of like a thought, it seems, yeah, this world now, our world is much more connected. So this, in a way, from like increase the likelihood of the virus really spreading faster and then spreading much more broadly and affecting everywhere. So generally the countries, villages, people are much more connected in a way, and that probably prompted this crisis become much more broadly affected, and then it becomes like a pandemic easier. So I kind of feel that we sort of compressed this 1918, 1919 Spanish flu in about like a 2-3 months of time span in 2020, because the mobility of people and really the connectedness of the countries really strengthen that the possibility of virus to travel as well. So that will be really the kind of like the similarity between this the crisis and the past pandemic.
And what do you think is unique about this crisis? Is there anything about this economically that's happening that we've just really never seen before, and it makes it hard to predict? Or I think there's many things, I should say. What about it for you do you find the most interesting and the most unique aspect of this through your work?
In fact, we are still better positioned, right? Like during that time, I think the war sort of made that kind of movement and then contacts unavoidable. Now the countries are much more connected, and it's also painful to disconnect or simultaneously and then also very suddenly. But we also have alternative sort of platforms to connect. Even if we are not in the physical contact, we can still, you can still actually interact on the cyberspaces. We can still share the information and then knowledge. There's much more transparency and then clarity in terms of collecting the data. So in some sense, I think it's not probably this crisis. This is not going to be the end of it. But each time we will add onto, learn onto the crisis experience, and then make us a bit more prepared in a way, a bit also like in a better position to deal with this type of crisis, because we learn lessons. But I also feel that the virus becomes much more smarter. So it's gonna be somehow kind of like endless probably battle going forward.
Yeah, well, at least, and I think when we look at economics, as I shared before we started recording, the idea that confidence in, at least in our sector, in travel was starting to grow. Businesses were starting to replan their open. But we see one major market in the region that has COVID under control have a spike in cases, and then suddenly it seems like there's a second wave of economic issues coming. So it's tenuous. Maybe until the time we have a vaccine, or maybe things will start to settle before then, but it's really unknown at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just one final question, and this has been a really great interview, and that's, as a leader of one of the region's most influential development and financial institutions, what do you believe is the unique value add of ADB at this time for recovery and building into the next normal? Of course, we know that there's a financial element, but beyond that, I'm continually impressed with the development capability of the professionals at ADB. And as a senior leader there, I'm really interested in what you think is the unique value that ADB can bring to a region that's in trouble right now and needs support.
Well, the crisis, in a way, in a way, make a lot of people to think about the downside of globalization. I don't really believe that we will be able to return to pre-globalization period, but there certainly will be some anti-globalization backlashes. Going beyond the social distancing, the nations will distance themselves. There might be more protectionist sentiments. As a regional institution, ADB is much better positioned to play a role of honest broker and then also the coordinator among nations with different positions and then different priorities to come together. They need to still think about what's actually best for everybody. Is it really better that we go back to the Stone Ages and we don't really talk to each other? Well, the globalization, despite all the like criticisms, recent criticism, it has brought us much more prosperity. And it really helped us work together to make the world better. And then we want to stay on that track, trying to make the impact of globalization more inclusive, but maintain also that sort of a growth momentum on a sustainable path. So the country, like maybe it is difficult to see it as just one country. Maybe one country may feel like if we stay a bit more kind of protected, meaning also distanced, we might be able to maybe resolve this much faster, or at least we won't really get the virus attacking us. But we can't really live without society. Same in the global community. I think the world is already moved past that, one country kind of making one world. That type of, the era is already gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we need some regional institution that at least start having that kind of a consensus even in a smaller group. It might be challenging to have a consensus in the bigger group, but with a bit more harmonized or a bit more like a homogeneous kind of group of countries, we may be able to build that momentum of, again, talking together and then reaching a consensus for the better world. And I think ADB can provide that role, being able to coordinate among different countries in the region.
That's a really good answer. That's a really good answer. And I think a hopeful answer, because one of the negative outcomes from this crisis, as you pointed out, could be a move towards protectionism. And that's problematic precisely because it's outdated. So if one country starts to do that, it will cause more issues, not only on the regional level, but for the constituents of that country, because those models won't work anymore. Mm-hmm. So it will not only hold that country back, but it will lead to conflict. And so by having a strong regional voice or an institution that's really championing these values, but showing up and being effective, not just talking, but actually bringing change and consulting with the countries is very important. So, okay, but before we end, is there any final comment that you wanted to make or any final note based on what we've discussed, or this concept of regional harmony in post-COVID Asia Pacific?
Well, I think everybody now has to have a bit of, long-term sort of views and agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to think of how to overcome, like individual differences, whether it's a person or a village or the country, and then think about like what's really good for everybody eventually after the COVID. So having more, these trade frictions. There, trade frictions were there even before we were entering into the COVID. But having, that sort of accelerated as a response to COVID will really worsen the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I do hope that countries do take a bit of a long-term view, and then as I earlier mentioned, again, we need to improve the weakest link in our community to make a better sort of a future. So the collaboration and cooperation is going to be really a key to help these weakest links, weakest neighbors to overcome the barriers and then also difficulties. And we should really try to work together to think of, a bit longer term, what's really the sustainable, what's really much better, resilient economy for everybody.
Okay, well, Dr. Park, thank you so much for your time today. This was a really informative interview, and I think really interesting, again, not only for people looking at the economics, but also I think an important tie for people in our industry and travel to get a better sense of the overall picture. Thank you very much.